Hello children, today we will be doing a poem from Reverie, a collection of ISC poems, and the poem is Crossing the Bar. Crossing the Bar is an elegy written by the British poet Alfred Lord Tennyson. It is a poem focusing on the transience of life and the finality of death. Lord Tennyson was a poet of the Victorian period and remained the poet laureate of Great Britain and Ireland during his lifetime. He is well celebrated to this day for his short lyrics. Crossing the Bar was written in 1889 when the poet was visiting the Isle of Wight and published in a volume Demeter and Other Poems in 1889. He was 80 years old at the time and was down with a severe illness, from which he eventually recovered. The illness, however, made the poet ponder on death as he himself was very old and nearing his time. He uses the metaphor of crossing a sandbar to represent death in this poem. He died 3 years later, and although he wrote a few more poems, he requested that all of his poetry volumes be ended with this poem. Thus, the poem is an important one and can be seen as Alfred Lord Tennyson's choice of his final words, Crossing the Bar. Form and structure. The poet consists of 4 stanzas and each of them are quatrains. The entire poem is connected both in theme and conceit. The stanzas do not individually stand on their own. They are tightly knit and carry the meaning forward to the next ones. Let me first read out the poem, children. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me. And may there be no moaning of the bar when I put out to sea. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark, and may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. For though from out our bourne of time and place, the flood may bear me far, I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. Now let me explain the poem. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me. Sunset is the time of the day when the sun goes down and the night begins. Here it means nearing end of life. And evening star is the planet Venus when it is seen in the western sky after the sun has set. So sunset and evening star and one clear call for me. The poem begins with the speaker describing the atmosphere. He says, it is sunset and the evening star can be seen in the sky. Someone is calling the speaker. It is a clear, unmistakable call. It is the call of death. The speaker believes that his death is close. It is interesting to note here the imagery the poet presents before us at the start of the poem. Sunset and evening star represent the end of the day. Just as the day is about to end, the speaker says that his life is drawing to an end as well. And may there be no moaning of the bar when I put out to sea. Moaning is long, deep sound, usually expressing pain, suffering, or unhappiness. And put out means to leave a port, harbor. Here the poet uses his famous metaphor of crossing the bar, describing death as an act of passing beyond life. The word bar here means a sandbar. A sandbar is a geographical structure which forms around the mouth of a river or extends from a spit by slow disposition of sediments carried by the current over millions of years. The structure forms a kind of barrier between the water inside, means the river water, and outside it, which is the open sea. The poet uses his sandbar as a symbol of death, with the water inside representing his life and the water beyond representing the afterlife. He wants to put out to sea without the mourning of the bar. Means the poet wishes his death to be without pain and without mourning. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam. Tide is a regular rise and fall in the level of the sea caused by the pull of the moon and the sun. Foam, a mass of very small air bubbles on the surface of the liquid. Here it is the sea. Through the poem, the poet Alfred Lord Tennyson compares his impending death to crossing a bar. In this stanza, in the second stanza, the speaker talks about the inevitability of death. Inevitability means unavoidable. The poet wishes that when he puts out to sea, that is when he dies, let it be like a ride which seems asleep as it moves. The speaker wants his death to be smooth, like a calm sea wave which is too full for sound and foam. The speaker hopes that his death will be silent, smooth and quick, making no fuss. When that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. Boundless means without limits, and deep is from a depth. In the subsequent lines, children, the poet uses the example of the river and the sea to express the kind of death he wishes for himself. The water from the sea evaporates and turns into clouds. These clouds bring rain, entering that water into the river, and these rivers too flow, carrying their water and eventually pouring it into the sea. They thus complete a cycle, and the water returns from where it came. Just so, the speaker, considering himself like the water, he says that he is returning where he came from, the boundless deep. Here apparently stands for the sea, and in an allegorical sense to the place the poet believes he will go to after his death. Here, children, we should notice that this stanza is a strict continuation of the idea introduced in the first stanza. The last lines of the first stanza, together with this one, makes up the meaning of the verse. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark. Now, what is the twilight? Twilight is a faint light at the end of the day after the sun has gone down. So here in this stanza, in the third stanza, the poet again resorts to describing the atmosphere to convey his inner feelings. It was sunset when the speaker started the poem, but now it is twilight. The sun has already gone down the horizon and dusk is settling. The speaker can hear the evening bell tolling. It is the indication that night is approaching. Then after a while it gets dark. It is night. The poet here uses twilight to show us the state of his life just as the day has ended. His life too is about to end. So here twilight stands for sadness, darkness and grief portray the speaker's miserable state before his death. And may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. Farewell? What is farewell? It is the act of saying goodbye to somebody and embark to get onto a ship. The speaker expresses his hope that there will be no sadness of farewell upon his death. The sadness of farewell is ambiguous and can mean both the speaker's own sadness as he departs from life or the sadness of the people whom he leaves behind and who are saying farewell to him. However, we think the former is more relevant. Again, Lord Tennyson writes, when I embark, to convey the idea of the speaker's death. Thus, it is evident from the word embark that death is not seen as a final destination by the poet, but rather as a new beginning. For though from out our bourne of time and place, the flood may bear me far. Bourne means boundary. Bear me means call me while moving. Now, in the previous stanza of this poem, we saw that the speaker's positive attitude towards death. We saw speaker's positive attitude towards death. It is seen to be exemplified in the final stanza of this poem. We understand the speaker has accepted his reality. What is the reality? Inevitability of death. He appears to have made his peace with the idea of his fast approaching death. He says that he will be beyond the boundaries of time and place, and the flood of death will carry him far away. This is going beyond the reach of this world. The speaker suggests that there is a place beyond our time and space where he hopes to go after his death. We are thus acquainted with the poet's belief in afterlife. I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. Who is the pilot here? Pilot here refers to God. These final lines of the poem are in allusions and they have some hidden meanings. Firstly, we are told that the speaker hopes to see his pilot face to face when he will have crossed the bar. Here the word pilot is a direct reference to God. Lord Tennyson had peculiar views on religion. On one hand, he disapproved of Christianity, while on the other, we see wide use of religious things and ideas in his works. Since God is considered to drive the world and all living things, we see the pilot reference of the divine world in the poem. Also, the use of the word crossed is interesting. While it might simply be a word to suggest crossing the bar, it is speculated that it might be a reference to Christ, as crossed is similar in sound to both Christ and cross. If so, then we find another allusion from the poem to region after life. And thus, the poem ends on a positive note with the poet both accepting the finality of death and hoping to meet God in the afterlife. Thus, we can say that this poem, Crossing the Bar, is all about accepting and embarrassing death rather than fearing the dark unknown. Now, what is the message of the poem Crossing the Bar? The extended metaphor of crossing the bar represents traveling serenely and securely from life through death. The pilot is a metaphor for God, whom the speaker hopes to meet face to face. Tennyson has explained in the poem, the pilot has been bored all the while, but in the dark I have not seen him. Thank you, children.